Shalom, shalom, Odpam, Kan Eliyahu Ba'achvat Tabat. Hello, again, this is Eliyahu from the Fellowship of the Ring. And today I have a very, very honored, important part of the fellowship, which for me is like the circle of light. And I'm very happy today's program will be in English, and I'm very happy and excited, actually, to be here with John Pehrson.
Hello, everybody.
And we were, about a month ago, I interviewed John and Jean together, Jean White Eagle and John together, and this time it's just going to be with John. And anyway, I'm very happy, and it's a big honor.
It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. And thank you for watching. Okay, so John, you've had an absolutely incredible life. I've read a lot of biographies and autobiographies, and I've met amazing people for many, many years. And I never met anybody who's maybe who's overcome odds like you have, and who's just overcome. So tell me a little bit, John. As we spoke before, explain a little bit about when you were growing up and how you came to live with your father. Okay, if that's okay.
Okay. It's hard to know when to begin, except to begin in the beginning.
That's always a good place.
When I was born, I lived with my father and my mother until I was about a year old. And my mother had a nervous breakdown, and she went into the hospital for a year when I was a year old. And so my father, who was doing the best he could to provide for the family, couldn't care for me and my brother and still take care of us. So he gave us to a friend.
Wow.
Who cared for us basically for about a year until my mother came out of the hospital. And that was really kind of a repeating kind of thing over the time I was growing up. My mother would be okay for a while, and then she would have another mental breakdown, and she'd go into the hospital from anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. And finally, what happened? So if I talk to the camera.
Tomorrow.
Okay, so sorry everybody. My mother was in and out of the mental hospitals when I was a kid, up until the time I was about 11. And finally what happened is that the stress on the family got great enough so my father and my mother divorced. And I lived with my mother for a while until my father was remarried, and he sued for custody. And then he won the custody battle, and I wound up living with my father and my brand new stepmother. And the relationship was fraught right from the beginning because I had refused to go to the wedding. And so I kind of had a strike against me when I went into the household. She also was living with her mother, who was about 75, almost, well, probably older than that at the time. So, and she had never had children, and she was in her 50s. So all of a sudden she had two teenagers come into the house, me, who was at the time about 13, and my brother at the time, who was about 17. And it was overwhelming for her. And she was quite a judgmental person. So one night at the dinner table, I said to her, "Hazel, you're the most immature and judgmental person that I've ever met in my life." Well, as you might imagine, it didn't go over too well. And I could see that the temper was beginning to build as a reaction to what I had said.
Mm-hmm.
So I politely excused myself from the table and went up to my room and locked the door, because I suspected that I knew what was coming. And of course it did. She came running upstairs, banging on the door, and then went downstairs to get a screwdriver to take the doorknob off.
Why?
And I said, well, you know, this is not good for me to hang around here. So I opened up the upstairs window and climbed out onto the garage roof, and then jumped down and disappeared for 3 days. My father had the police looking for me, and they couldn't find me. And when I finally did come back of my own accord, my bags were packed and they were on the bed, and I was no longer welcome to stay there. So I wound up on a place called Bonnie Brae Farm for Boys, which was a state institution. It was a boys' home basically for guys. There was no girls, boys, that were from about 7 to 17, and who had been in minor scrapes with the law, nothing really serious, or had been orphans, or in my case had really just kind of been thrown out of their families and didn't have a place to go. So the luck of the draw was that I was, the kids on Bonnie Brae Farm either went to a vocational school to learn a trade, or if they had some academic prowess, which I did, went to a high school. And the local high school just happened to be a better high school than I had left when I was living with my father and stepmother. And in fact, it had the graduation rate, people going to college, was about 85%, which was very high. But being from Bonnie Brae Farm for Boys, I also had the stigma of that when I went to the public high school.
I bet.
So the teachers automatically assumed that I was incorrigible, that I was stupid, and that they were going to have a hard time with me. And what happened was I was on the honor rolls. I was in excelled in the athletics and playing football and that kind of thing, and was all in the advanced courses and stuff. So I wound up excelling in school and being back at the Bonnie Brae Farm. I also published a newspaper for the boys. I became a liaison between the staff and the kids that were there. I also became the head waiter for the kitchen and had a staff of boys under me. So it was an experience that strengthened me.
I bet, no doubt about it.
But my brother also went there.
Yes.
And he had gotten tossed out of the house actually a couple months earlier than I had. And he was almost 4 years older than I was. But it was the Bonnie Brae was a non-verbal society. If you had an argument with somebody, you didn't sit down and talk it out.
No, I don't suppose.
You went outside and you took care of it by, fighting. And I was actually pretty good at that too. So.
Oh, I hear you were particularly good at that, and thank God you were, because if you weren't, well, it would have been very hard. Isn't that right?
Well, I wound up being the defender for my brother, who was older than I was.
4 years older. Wow.
But he came out of it pretty weakened.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's probably more than your audience wanted to hear.
No, I think it's very important. All of this is the background, and what else? It was science and math that you were particularly strong, isn't that right?
Well, I guess you could say I was strong in science and math, but I was also very strong in English when I went to the university, which was Iowa State University in Ames, Iowa, the middle of our country.
Right.
I majored in chemical engineering.
Yes, that's what I remembered.
But I also had enough credits in English to have a minor, had they allowed a minor. I actually was taking graduate courses in English by the time I graduated from college.
So you were an all around scholar athlete. Okay, and eventually, as I recall, you went to work for DuPont. Is that right? The giant chemical corporation.
I did.
And John, you were making a really, really good salary, weren't you?
Yeah, I was. I was hired by DuPont straight out of university. So I went actually directly from Iowa, where I was, living to go to school, to Tennessee, right outside of Nashville, to work for the old for DuPont at the old Hickory manufacturing plant, which was just about 15 miles north of Nashville, and they made Dacron polyester there, among other things.
For clothing and stuff, is that right?
It was primarily for home furnishings and apparel. Yeah.
Okay. And
I worked for DuPont for 21 years.
Whoa, that's a long time. And you must have rose pretty high because you were making a very good living, isn't that right?
Well, I went up the ranks. I only worked on what we lovingly called it the Dacron farm. I only worked on the Dacron farm for about 6 years, getting my manufacturing experience stripes, and then the way the company would train you is then they would have you go into an assignment to do technical service, and then into sales, and then into strategic positions like being a business strategist or a marketing strategist, that kind of thing. And I did all that, and I finally wound up managing a business called Serlin, which was a packaging business. It wasn't my most favorite time in DuPont, but yeah, I was managing a business that was about a quarter of $1 billion.
Whoa!
And in DuPont, you have to understand, DuPont was a $40 billion company, so a $250 million was still a fairly small business. So I was considered middle management, but I also had, I had profit and loss responsibility for a business that was that size.
Okay, so how did you make this incredible U-turn from very successful big businessman working for a chemical company to doing what you've been doing for many, many years, being on this important world mission of spreading sacred sound teaching and healing for the whole world. Of course, this is where your meeting with Jean must come in. Can you tell us about this incredible U-turn that your life took?
Sure. First thing to know for your listeners is that it didn't happen all at once.
I don't suppose.
I'd always had a spiritual side of me, and always wrestled with trying to integrate my spiritual beliefs, which weren't primarily focused into any dogmatic religious tradition. They were more spiritual, I guess you'd say, instead of religious. And I recognize that, I'm not trying to be judgmental, but I recognize that the two can coexist, but spiritual aspects might be considered in some regards more New Age, you may say.
Okay.
Anyway, I always had those leanings, and I tried to integrate them into my business principles, and there were the best times I ever had in DuPont were those times where I was able to do that. We were able to manage from a more holistic standpoint, from a standpoint of sustainability and taking care of the earth and its environmental aspects in cooperation with what we were manufacturing at the time. and treating all the employees with compassion and empowerment. So what happened was eventually the pathway up the ladder inside the corporation and the pathway to nurturing my own spirituality started to diverge. And it got further and further and further apart. And I finally got to a point inside DuPont where I had to make a decision to stay or to leave. And sometimes when you get to those crossroads, what happens is that the universe gives you a little shove.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's what happened inside DuPont. I had a little dispute with my boss over expense accounts. And the company, I hated to do expense accounts because it took time away from doing my other management duties, you know? And so I did them, when I did my expense accounts, I did them fairly quickly, and I didn't pay a lot of attention sometimes to things I should have paid more attention to. Because it was like in the priorities of things, it didn't seem that important. But the company came back and said, and found errors on several of my expense accounts, and my boss accused me of fraud.
Oh, wow.
And I came back from a meeting out of town one time, and I was pulled into his office and told that in 15 minutes I was going to be brought in front of a tribunal.
Oh, my.
That consisted of human resources and finance and some other management types, and I needed to answer questions about my expense reports, and I should be very humble and kowtow to these people. Well, I was really aggravated because, you know, my boss was a guy I rode to work with 3 days a week, and we had shared a lot of personal information with each other. We were friends, I thought.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, here was this betrayal. So I went to this tribunal and I answered their questions, and instead of being humble, I looked at them and I told them they should be ashamed of themselves, and that they ought to be spending their time on something that was really worthwhile instead of on a witch hunt, and that I was really aggravated about. So I went back into my boss's office and told him I wasn't going to work for him anymore, and that if he could get me a retirement package, that I was out of there.
And is that what happened?
And that's what happened. So they were downsizing anyway, and I knew it. So, you know, even though I was considered a top-rated performer at the time, I was within a gnat's eyelash of being accused of insubordination because of the way I was speaking to my boss.
Yes, yes.
And they actually accepted my offer, and they got me a package, and I was out of DuPont by the end of the year. So it was a dramatic set of events that really helped me make a decision to take a more spiritual turn in life.
And you met, and that's how you met Jean, isn't it? You met her in some kind of organization?
Well, I actually had known Jean before that. We had met in an organization called the World Business Academy.
Right.
And again, this was this attempt to merge spirituality with business. Because the World Business Academy, what it was about was saying that business was the most influential and pervasive institution on the planet.
Yes.
And that education and religious organizations had basically abdicated their role to take care of the planet, and it was up to business to really take responsibility for what they were doing and responsibility for the whole. And so it was composed of executives from actually around the world who were trying to manage with more holistic principles, with more attention to the environment, etc. And Jean was the coordinator of all of the different chapters.
Okay.
And I was starting a chapter in New York and helping to start a chapter in Washington at the time.
Okay. So what I understand is it wasn't such a big U-turn. You were always looking for the spiritual way to do things. And so now it's clear to me. So,
I just got a little push.
Yes, you got a little push. Okay. So, John, I want to change gears here. You've had the privilege of meeting some of the great indigenous teachers in the world, including Mayan elders and the great Zulu leader, a spiritual leader, Credo Mutwa, and from Australia and from New Zealand and from so many places I don't even know about because I just read the book.
Well, thank you. You're one of the few.
Well, I hope that'll change because it should. So you've had the privilege of meeting these incredible shamans and indigenous spiritual leaders. What have you learned from these meetings with people so different, maybe from the people that you and I have grown up with?
Well, one thing I've learned is that they're all human.
Ha ha ha.
You know, whether it's Don Policarpio, who was a beautiful Ayamari priest in Bolivia, or whether it was Credo Mutwa, spiritual leader, and Hai Sanusi in South Africa, or Joseph Ryle, beautiful painted arrow in the United States, or Sai Baba. What I realized is that the tendency that we have is to put these beautiful luminary souls on a pedestal.
Yes, that's right.
And when you see them and you meet them and spend time with them up close and personal, they're all human. And
meaning what?
I can remember having an ayahuasquero who was an amazingly psychic individual stay at our home in New Mexico. And we had gone through a ceremony with him one night, and the next morning he was sitting on the couch just crying his eyes out. Crying his eyes out. Because he had his problems too. And you know, it's easy to look from a distance and say these people have attained such high spiritual states.
Which they have.
Which they have. And they have earned them. And they have tremendous abilities and capabilities.
Yes.
And yet, they have a humanity where they feel just like us. They have foibles. They have things that they would like to do different, just like everybody else.
They get angry and they lose their temper.
They get angry, they lose their temper. They have relationship problems. You know, some of them have alcohol problems. Some, you know, it's. But in their own rights, they have attained these amazing spiritual states. So that was a very important teaching for me because there's a tendency that I have, I don't know, perhaps many of you listeners do too, to judge yourself and to kind of beat yourself up a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, and say, how am I ever going to do what Credo Mutwa could do? Or how can I ever do what Joseph Ryle could do? You know? So when I get into those places, I try to remember that.
Okay. And well, what have you learned from these people? Like, what's the major thing you've learned from these people? Other than that, other than the fact that they're human just like us and they have their emotions, have you learned a way of being in harmony with the universe, or seeing into the soul, or is there anything else, maybe of a more anything else that you'd like to mention that has affected you very much from these meetings?
Another common thread is that these individuals all had the ability to be non-judgmental, and to come from a place of love. So there's this ability to step back from being caught up in the vortex of life and to be able to recognize that the most powerful force in the universe is love. And they all exuded this presence of love. Sai Baba, when you're in the presence of Satya Sai Baba, he's passed on now, but so he could be anywhere. But when you're in his presence, I mean, it's palpable, and it's the same thing for some of these other people as well. Credo Mutwa. Credo Mutwa. You talk about, you said that you thought my life was some things you had to overcome. Well, people like Credo Mutwa, the things that they have overcome is just amazing and would crush most people.
I can imagine a black child growing up in apartheid South Africa, where they were treated like slaves and like dirt very often. I did once read a book called Kefir Boy, which I'll never forget. You mean stuff like that, is that right?
In addition to that, which all the blacks grew up with, Credo Mutwa saw that most of the wisdom keepers were dying. Okay? The people that really held the oral traditions of his people, the people that really knew the spiritual secrets of his people, the spiritual depth and wealth of the tradition that he was in, they were dying. And so he, against some of the vows he took when he became a Sangoma, not to reveal some of this stuff, he wrote it down in a book.
Wow.
And he was ostracized for that. Not only was he ostracized for that, but his wife was killed. She was speared in the side with a Zulu spear.
Whoa.
And his son, he had been training to take over his position as the High Sanusi and the person that held all these oral traditions, was killed. And not only was he killed, but he was necklaced. Do you know what I mean by necklaced?
Yes, with the tires.
And the reason in the Zulu society that is so bad, and let me describe it to the listeners, it's not very nice. They tie hands and feet like hog tied.
Yeah.
Hands behind the back, and they tie the hands to the feet, and they put a tire around the neck,
fill
it with gasoline,
Jesus
and light it
Christ.
on fire. The reason that is so brutal is not because it's such a horrific death, but it's because they believe that it destroys the soul.
Why?
Okay? So it's a double death. I mean, it's physical death, but it also destroys. The Zulu believe that you have the Ina and the Moya. And the Ina is the part of the soul that lives on as kind of an astral body after you're dead, and you can use that to interact with, that's what they interact with for the ancestors.
Yes.
And the Moya is the indestructible light body that all religions believe in.
Yes.
So when they burn somebody with if you die by fire or you die by drowning, then they believe that the Ina is destroyed, and they no longer have that aspect of the soul to be able to relate to. So still, this man, after going through those kinds of things with his wife and his son, was able to come from love.
And now he's the spiritual leader of all the Zulu. Is that not right? He's an old man now.
Yeah, he's got to be 87.
So, in other words, he's over. Would you agree that he's triumphed over those who were trying to denigrate him?
I think he will in time.
Okay.
There are those who call him the father of Africa and consider him to be the spiritual leader of Africa.
Whoa. And what a privilege to have been able to spend time. I've seen him interviewed. Real privilege, I suppose. Okay, John, over the years we've met sometimes, and you've told me amazing stories. And of course, I remember them. And I've made it a point. Well, I couldn't even forget them if I wanted to. One very interesting story is you and Jean were wanting to build a sound chamber in a very sacred place in Australia. And Jean had received that it needs to be done. And there was an Aborigine shaman who liked to dress up as Elvis, as I recall, who was against you, even though he didn't show that outwardly. And anyway, you received permission from the Aborigine elders to build this thing and to do the ceremony. And at a certain point, in his spirit body, this shaman stabbed Jean. Is that right, or am I remembering it a little off? And
there are parts of it, you're remembering some of it correctly, but let me just correct you.
That's what I want.
We had a friend in Australia who also was a friend of Joseph Ryle, Beautiful Painted Arrow, who had a vision to build peace sound chambers around the world. And these were structures that were based on the old ceremonial structures from his tribe called kivas, that you could go in and sing and pray for peace. And really what they are is they're kind of like capacitors. You go in and you sing in these things, you chant in these things, and it builds the energy up to a certain level, and then the energy goes out and it blesses the land. One of our friends in Australia built a peace sound chamber on her land.
Okay.
And it happened to be the fourth one that was ever built in the world. And we began to do, because of one of Jean's visions, which have taken us around the world, some chamber awakening ceremonies. And it was a process where Jean would go into the chamber and she would sing as a group of us would be outside being the listeners. And we had a ceremonial fire built. This usually took place at night. And it really was for opening the gateways of the energy up as wide as possible. It's like bringing these things online is a worldwide grid of peace sound chambers.
Yes.
Okay, you can make kind of an electrical circuit metaphor where they're all kind of connected together. And Jean's vision was told her how to be able to kind of bring them online.
Okay.
So we were doing a sweat lodge in preparation for this ceremony, and what happened was this Aboriginal guy, I won't use his name, he's still a beautiful man. I mean, he showed up in the lodge and stabbed Jean with his spear. And that was...
in his light body?
In his light body.
Okay.
The significant thing to me was that, well, first thing, I was kind of a neophyte, and I really wasn't adept enough to really stop that from happening.
Which you've learned to do.
Which I've learned to do, but it also taught me at the time that I had a lot more to learn.
Okay.
And the second thing was that from our time in Australia, we went to New Zealand. We spent some time with the Owl tribe, going down the Wanganui River, and we went back to the United States. Well, once we got back to the United States, Jean was very sick. And
because he had stabbed her, isn't that part of it?
Well, I didn't put it together, but Jean actually developed intestinal cancer, where I saw this guy stab her.
Yeah.
Right? So that was the connection. And who can say if what I saw was the cause of it, but it certainly was, a synchronicity.
And then Jean went on to heal herself with diet and sacred sound. Isn't that right?
That's correct. And it only took her 5 months.
Okay.
But she went through a lot of pain.
I can imagine. Okay, and I seem to remember something about New Zealand. There was a cave in New Zealand with hand paintings and your hands fitting in that.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
That was actually the year before. It was in Australia, wasn't it? It was No, that was the same year. Yeah, Jean had another dream. We have a friend that every time Jean has a dream or a vision, she comes and puts her arm around my shoulder and whispers in my ear, "Oh my God, not another freaking vision." Anyway, Jean had a dream, and we wound up, and in the dream she had seen this cave wall with hand paintings. You know, the Aborigines did these paintings where they'd take their hands,
yes,
and they'd have paint or pigment in their mouth, and they'd blow the pigment over their hands, and it would leave this hand painting.
Yes.
And so she saw a cave wall with all these hand paintings, and then she saw that some ancestors that were there beckoning her to come.
Oh, wow.
And so one of the things that differentiates us from other people is that when Jean gets a vision, or I get a vision, we act on it.
Yes.
And we do something about it. And
Yes.
it's wound up carrying us all around the world. So what happened was Jean started to talk about her vision and call up some friends in Australia who said they would go ahead and put together a trip.
Yes.
And by the time it rolled around for us to go back to Australia, we wound up with 21 people, 14 of which were from outside of Australia that had come to support Jean in her vision, as well as they had had their own dreams about Australia. And so they came also to fulfill their own visions and dreams.
Whoa.
Well, the task we had was where to find this cave wall. And we didn't know where it was. And we started out from a place called Gympie, which was north of Brisbane. And we went actually across the Simpson Desert towards where Alice Springs is.
Okay.
And then we went up north and back around again, back down to towards Brisbane.
Okay.
And we had no idea where this was. And so what we did was we would get up every morning. You know, most nights we were sleeping outside. You know, they brought some tents with us and stuff, and every night we would set up the tents and we would light fires and cook our meals, and it was an interesting time together. We had some adventures going across the desert. One of the vehicles broke down and we had to fly a part in from someplace.
I'm sure.
But every day we followed the signs. And we watched the animals, and we would sing a prayer in the morning with spontaneous song, and that ultimately led us to where this cave wall is. But even then, the teaching was we had to get out of our own way. We had to get to the point where we just totally surrendered and said, "Spirit, we've looked every place we think we knew it was, and we haven't found it. If you want us to find us, you're going to have to show us." And what happened is we wound up just on a whim going to see this guy who was one of these people that was like an Australian cowboy. And he was one of these guys that would muster horses, wild horses and stuff, you know.
Yeah.
And he could do bullwhips in both hands, and he used to do drive stage coaches and all this kind of stuff. It's just like the American West, except in Australia.
Yep.
And he just happened to be the caretaker of some sacred land.
Oh my.
And when we met with him, our whole group met with him, he said, "I want to show you this sacred land." And he took us to this place that he was the caretaker of.
He brought it up. You didn't bring it up?
He brought it up. He took us to this land, and there was the cave walls, and the hand paintings, and the star glyphs that were there. It was about 100 meters long, and it was a representation of what they call the Rainbow Serpent.
Yes.
It's the Milky Way.
Oh, wow.
And there was a star map of what it would look like to look from the Milky Way onto our solar system.
Oh, my.
Isn't that interesting?
It's very interesting.
And everybody in the group was able to go up and almost directly walk to the handprint that was theirs. And be able
What do you mean that was theirs?
They just had a sense that they were the ones that put the handprints there.
Oh my goodness.
And they were
in a previous incarnation.
In a previous incarnation. And me as well, because what happened when I put my hand in that handprint, it was like I had stuck my finger in an electrical socket.
You were downloaded with something, I suppose.
I think I was, because my whole body started to shake. I began to cry uncontrollably.
Whoa, whoa.
And I just almost couldn't hardly stand up. So we got it that we were the ancestors that had put that there. And I asked him what the dating was on the hand paintings, and he said that they had been radiocarbon dated to about somewhere between 8,000 and 12,000 years ago.
Amazing, amazing. I remember that story particularly from the book, because it so much blew my mind, and of course it does, still does. Okay, John, I wanted to get into the topic of time and sacred time. And I was thinking about it just last night. In the Western world, we've replaced the cyclical time of our ancestors with sort of a linear time. We don't understand big cycles of time, and the precession of the equinoxes. Most people don't know what that is, and we think it's just going forward somewhere, and we don't know where, unless you may be religious, and then you're thinking, well, maybe things have to get so bad until Jesus returns, or until the Messiah comes, or whatever. But there's not much sense of much meaning other than maybe bringing the Messiah somehow of this linear time. But and then I was thinking about cyclical time, and cyclical time I don't think is exactly right either, unless it has the wisdom that human beings are progressing and going to higher levels. And if it doesn't have that, I think it's off as well. And I think I thought that it has to be a combination of a cyclical time, because everything is cyclical in the universe, but it has to be going towards something, like what people call the divine plan. What do you think about this whole topic of sacred time and cyclical and linear time?
Wow. That's a big topic.
Yes, it is.
Several thoughts. One is that when you talk about cyclical time, the image I get in my mind is that of a spiral.
Yes.
So that we are coming back to a certain point on the spiral, but we're never back at really the same point. We've gone up a level.
That's my understanding.
Which is what you're talking about in terms of ascending to a higher state of consciousness.
That's my understanding.
Second thought that came up is that, of course, many people know, and maybe many of your listeners know, that we are finishing up a long cycle, what the Mayans would call a long cycle of 25,625 years, I think it is, for us to make half a rotation around around our own Milky Way galaxy, around our own little section of the universe.
Yeah, around our galactic center.
Around our galactic center, yes, that's right. So we've taken half turn, and that's going to become exact on December 21st, 2012.
Well, the full turn will turn then. We've just, I understand, finished the 25,000, whatever it is, cycle. Yes?
Yeah, but
yes.
That's halfway.
Okay.
That's halfway around the galactic center.
Ah, okay, okay.
So the full turn, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the full turn is like 50.
No, I don't think so. I think the half turn is 12,000 whatever, and the full turn is 25,000 whatever.
Okay, well, full turn, half turn, we're making a significant crossing, if you will.
Yes.
And there's an arc of space, you might say, as we approach this alignment with the galactic center.
Yes.
And then when we leave it, it takes about 2 years. So we've really been in it since about December 2000.
You mean 2,000 years, do you not?
No, I'm talking about
okay.
where the alignment becomes exact.
Okay. Okay.
We're kind of, it's like tuning the radio station.
Okay.
You know, on an old analog radio.
Yes, I remember them well.
Okay. When you turn that knob and you're trying to get it to come in clearly, well, it's going to come in clearly when we get to December 21st, 2012. Okay. But for about 2 years before and 2 years after.
Okay. You mean the exact center? Well, whatever. Okay.
Right. So nobody knows exactly what's going to happen as we make this crossing, but the speculation is that we are coming closer and closer to this emerging into a higher state of consciousness.
Yes.
And so we are getting to the point where many of us, Jean, my wife Jean and I, as well as many light workers around the world, are working for this time of when we can get to critical mass, you might say, when enough people have raised their awareness, raised their consciousness, so that everything shifts.
Okay.
And so that long cycle of time may be one of those points that it takes to get to that next evolution of consciousness.
Barbara Han Clow talks about how we're finishing right now, around this period, even much longer cycles of time. She says that we're finishing right now, exactly around this date of December 21st next year, we're finishing a 200 million year cycle. So, I mean, who knows? But I'd like to hear about your work with sacred numerology and your calendar especially. Well, we only have about 13 minutes left, but as much as you can.
Let's talk about the calendar first.
Yes.
One of the things I did differently with my system, which I call mystical numerology, is that I developed a new calendar for it. Because what I recognized is that how we divide up the year is an arbitrary thing.
Okay.
A little history lesson. If you go back before Julius Caesar, there wasn't a 12-month calendar, there was a 10-month calendar. Okay. And I know, you know, the Jewish calendar is a lunar calendar. But
well, lunar is sun somehow mixed. I don't know. Okay.
Yeah, and I don't quite understand all that, but I do understand that what happened was Julius Caesar's astrologers came into him and said, you know, we're living by a 10-month calendar, and it really doesn't make sense because we have 12 constellations and not 10 constellations.
Right.
And so we really ought to have the months roughly line up with the constellations. So we ought to have 12 months. And so what they did is they added 2 months. That's when January and February were added to the calendar.
Okay.
And they made it a 12-month calendar. Another reason we may have a 12-month calendar is not just because the 12 constellations, because, you know, there is back at the time of Ptolemy in the 2nd century AD, they knew, at least back to that time, that there were actually 13 constellations, not 12. And many of your listeners may know that in 1995, there was a recommendation made by a couple of astrologers to add Ophiuchus, which is the serpent bearer, to the constellations in the astrological charts.
Okay.
So there really are 13.
Okay.
But the Sumerians and the Egyptians were enamored of the number 12.
Well, the whole earth seems to be enamored of the number 12. But yes, continue.
It may be another reason that we wound up with 12 months. But it's certainly the reason we wound up with 2 segments of 12 hours on each day.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So I got to thinking, the Mayan spiritual calendar has 20 day lords that cycle through 13 different energies.
Okay.
And that was kind of my jumping off point. And I said, well, I wonder what would happen if you tried to align the solar year with the number 13 instead of 12. And what I found was that, do the math. You divide 365 by 12, and you get 13 increments of 28 days, and you have 1 day left over. So you get a much more regular calendar if you do it. In the Hebrew tradition, of course, the word echad, which means one, the gematria of echad is 13.
Yes.
So there is an automatic connection also between the number 13 and the concept of oneness, which is something that, if we could get everybody to recognize that we are all connected and in some ways we are part of the same consciousness, it would be life-changing, it would be world-shifting.
You bet.
So the other thing is that in my study of the numbers, which I'll get to in just a second, 12 is a much more explosive energy than 13.
13 among the Jews is connected with mercy.
Similarly, in my research, 13 is this energy of being able to build something up. It's the energy of being able to connect with the infinite potential. It's the energy of being able to give something back. It's the energy of life. It's the energy of being in community with each other.
And by the way, 13 is a 4. And achad, the Hebrew word for one way of reading it, as my friend Deborah has pointed out, is ach, which means brother, dalet, which is 4, it's the 4th letter, it's the brother of the 4. So I don't know, there's all kinds of interesting things. So it's also the 13 and also the brother of the 4.
Right.
Okay.
12 is a visionary energy, and it helps us step into the space of being innovative and inventive, which has helped us a lot. But it's also the energy of earthquakes. It's the energy of explosion.
It's a 3. It's a catalyst energy. It's like a fire spark energy, according to Cryon.
So when we govern our lives by 12-month years, by 12-hour day, segments of day and night,
whoa,
we lock ourselves into this explosive energy that sometimes pits us against each other. So if we could transition to a 13-month calendar,
whoa,
then we might find that it would shift our paradigms in a in a way that would be very, very beneficial to the world and to each other. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that it works. My 13-month calendar works. When I take people's birth dates and I translate them onto my calendar and then do the numerology for it, it works. And I've done thousands of charts. So the other thing about mystical numerology is I actually look at it as the study of sound.
Okay.
And the reason is, think of it, everything in the universe vibrates.
Yes.
It's energy in some form. And it's sound that brings it into manifestation. So numbers are the gateways, they are the channels for consciousness to move through sound to help things manifest into the world. And they do that because consciousness is moving through the energy of your name, It's moving through the energy of the words we use.
Which are all numbers, which can all be converted into numbers.
Which all can be converted into numbers, which then create our reality. So mystical numerology really is the systematic study of how energy moves through the consciousness of names and words to create our reality.
Oh, wow.
And what I did differently from traditional Western numerology was that I went back to the source and I said, let's define the numbers from the beginning. And the way we can do that is because every word can be reduced to a number.
Yes.
And if we
certainly in Hebrew, very, very much in Hebrew.
And then
every letter is a number.
That's
yes.
right. And so then if we can categorize the energy of those words by numbers, we can go back and redefine what the numbers mean.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
Now, the other thing that's different about my system is that you don't, traditional Western numerology, what you do is you stop when you get to 9, and then 10 becomes a 1 again.
Exactly. There are only
and like
from 0 to 9.
Like you were saying, you were trying to say 12 then is a 3,
right.
13 is a 4. Well, not in my system.
Okay.
The Kabbalah has 22 paths, right?
22 letters, 22 paths.
22 paths.
Each letter is a world.
Between the 10 spherot, yes?
Yes.
Okay, well, in my system, what I did was I take the vowel sounds out of the alphabet as the principal energies. And in a way, Hebrew does the same thing because you have 22 letters, but
no vowels.
No vowels, right?
No vowel.
Why is that? It's because the vowels are the fundamental creations, the fundamental energies of creation. And they stand by themselves. So what I did was I put these all on a map. And the map for me became the medicine wheel. It has the cardinal directions: east, south, west, north, above, below, and center. All right? And the vowel sounds become like the guardian angels in each of those directions. They become the fundamental energies that then are channeled through the numbers to create reality. Okay? But then if you connect up all those different paths on the medicine wheel, you also get 22.
Okay.
So 22 is the magic, it's like the Major Arcana in the numerological system.
It's exactly the Tarot. It's 22 cards, I believe, in the Major Arcana of Thoth. 22 Hebrew letters. Cryon says 22 means master builder. It's a master number.
Okay. So I lost my train of thought, but there are 22 pathways. There are 22 numbers, so you don't reduce anything until you get above 22.
Oh, wow.
Now when you get to 23, then that becomes a 5. 2 plus 3
are 5.
Oh,
wow.
All right? But it also means that each one of those numbers has a pathway on the medicine wheel. Eliyahu is a 15. It connects the head and the heart.
Oh, wow.
From a number standpoint.
Okay. Good to know.
Isaac is a 17. It connects the physical and the mental.
Okay.
All right.
I'd be happy to experience more of that.
Holly is a 24
in
my system, which is a 6. 2 plus 4 is equal to 6.
Right.
6 is the shamanic number. It's the ability to connect with the ancestors. It's the ability to be with people.
Oh, wow.
It's the ability to make discoveries and to be an awakener. And you certainly have been an awakener for people. So, yes. The principal differences of my system are that it has a different calendar, 13-month calendar. The vowel sounds are treated differently. They become fundamental energies and not numbered. And there are 22 paths on the medicine wheel that become kind of like the Major Arcana. Anyway, in a nutshell, that's what how mystical numerology differs from traditional numerology.
We have 2 minutes, not much, but maybe sometime we could continue later in the future, I hope. John, you've been given this, haven't you not? You have been blessed and received this because I'm feeling right now that it's something very, very important. Well, okay. I mean, that's my feeling. Anything else you would like to say? We have another minute.
Yeah, the way this has come to me has been over a period of years, but it has always moved forward by these eureka moments, you know?
Yes.
Whether they were on a train from Frankfurt to Venice. I can remember riding a train from Frankfurt to Venice several years ago, and all of a sudden just getting an amazing, you know, aha, this is how it works. And so that's how this system has developed over the years. I guess you could say it has been inspired.
Okay. How about a little song to finish? What do you say? Just
okay.
Something to bless the world and bless us all.
This is actually a very powerful day to sing a spontaneous song because of the energy of the day with my numerology system.
Roy, you just disconnect whenever you need to. Please. Okay.
Hey ho, hey ho, hey ho, hey ho, hey for the people. Oh, that was fun.
That was great. That was great. That was really great.